And here we are again. Freethought Hour. Wonkety. So, Tarsia, you've disappeared. Never mind. Oh, you're back. Okay, right. You see, I can spy on you using the backstage feature, as you know. Anyway, how the devil are you, Tess? Speak to me.
I'm well, thank you. My connection should hold. We're not getting fiber yet. And it's been a lovely mild spring day in South Africa. All my rugby teams won the matches that they were supposed to, and I'm beginning to adjust to my son being on a boat in Japan. So.
Yes, you've one of your nestlings has flown.
He has now literally flown. He flew off to Japan. He'll be working for an art dealership on one of these luxury cruise liners.
It's very exciting. Yes.
It is. Yes, it is. I'm a bit envious, the joys of being able to explore and do amazing things.
We'd all love to have our youth back, wouldn't we, Bill?
No, frankly. My son's going to Japan. I once spent 2 years learning Japanese because I was keeping koi and I always wanted to go to Japan. It's absolutely fascinating language. It's a mixture of complexity and simplicity. But absolutely fascinating. I really enjoyed it.
Did you ever go?
No. We decided in the end to emigrate to Spain, and so I sort of put down the Japanese and took up Spanish. So.
Wow.
And how is your Spanish?
But not too bad. I always say hablo malo pero con gusto. Badly but with much enjoyment.
Okay, lots of gusto. Yes. So the first thing I want to know, Bill, is when you was there a shortage of L's?
No, that's a story that goes back about 50 years. I'm a very avid science fiction reader. I used to have this huge library, and I think I had to bin about 3/4 of it so as to be able to afford to ship what was left out to Spain. And about, like I say, when I was 15, a friend of mine and I used to share and swap books. And one day on the Friday, he gave me this big book, and it's called Bll the Galactic Hero by Harry Harrison, who's a very, very good science fiction writer, sadly dead now. And he said, "You like this, it's good." And he was right, it was. And in the book, Bill is press ganged into the Space Marines. It's this wonderful Mickey take of that whole sort of, space opera type thing. And he's signed in and they say, "What's your name?" And he says, "Bill," with 2 L's. And the petty officer writes in the book with round illiterate letters, BIL, all small letters. Turns to him and says, "2 L's, officers only, learn your place." I finished the book over the weekend, and when I went back into school on the Monday, my friend had got into school before me and had gone through all my textbooks, and where it was Bll Wight with 2 L's, he crossed out the second L and written underneath it, "2 L's, officers only."
And it stuck, yeah. Well, that's a great story. And what about the white bit? It looks as though you missed out the R.
Yeah, a lot of people think that. It isn't. Wright and White are 2 very, very different names. Trying to think now. Wheelwright.
With an R, you see?
Yeah. Barrow White. It's basically, it's the same as Wright, but different, if you like.
It's right, but a bit more illiterate.
Well, yeah, the trouble is, all my damned life, you fill in your details on a piece of paper and give it to somebody, and they then copy it out onto a form. I'd sit there and watch them put an R in it.
Yes, I bet.
I just don't know what to do to stop people. I mean, I always remember one time saying to somebody before he could do it, "Oh, it's spelled And he wrote SPELL. And he said,
well, there's just no answer, I'm afraid. Anyway, the reason that we're here is I bumped into you on social media somewhere, and I thought you sound like an interesting fellow, and then we had a chat, and indeed you are an interesting fellow. So tell us a bit about your journey, because it's not usual for people to have come through life the way you have.
Well, I started off getting through the education. I did 2 years at Liverpool University, and I dropped out at the end of that. I did biochemistry and zoology. I enjoyed it, but when you're studying zoology and you see people with degrees who can't tell the difference between the spleen and the lungs of an animal, or who can't tell the difference between a frog and a toad, and these are zoology degree people.
Yeah.
After a while, you just think, oh, why am I doing this? And so after the second year, I just thought, oh, screw it, I'm going. So I dropped out. I spent 2 years working on the M11 as a labourer, and very little odd jobs. And then somebody said to me, have you ever thought of working for yourself? And, yeah, but what do I do? And he said, well, we had to wait 6 months for a chimney sweep. And I thought, oh, that sounds good. So I'll try that. So I kitted myself out, started off. And of course, the 6 months was because everybody worked like a slave for the winter 6 months, if you like. And then there wasn't much work around in the summer.
Yeah.
But I persisted. I ended up becoming the chairman of the National Association of Chimney Sweeps. I created the City and Guilds in chimney cleaning, which was the first nationally recognised qualification in chimney cleaning. And I did that until I took early retirement, basically.
I would. So do many? Is this mostly private houses, or is it industrial buildings? Because
no, private and domestic. In industrial chimneys and things like that, oh no. We would sometimes get called into places, and you have to remember there's very strict rules in domestic chimneys, because you're not allowed to put 90-degree bends in and things like this. You can't get a brush around them. You just can't do it. And the stuff sits in the horizontal section and risks blocking it. And you go around, and it would be something like, one case it was a coffee firm who made ground coffee. And of course, the pipes were getting clogged up with coffee dust. But this pipe went up like 20 or 30 feet into the ceiling of this huge building, and then did a right angle, went horizontal for about 20 feet, then did another. And you just look at it and you go, yeah, no. No, basically.
So I presume you didn't stick any 5-year-old kids in there.
I'll give you an interesting thing now. When I started out, I read up about a lot of this and how they used to put children up chimneys.
Yeah.
And I remember once saying at a meeting to a more experienced sweep, I said, I've never seen any of these chimneys that they used to put children up. And he said, yes, you have. You sweep them all the time. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, what's a standard Victorian chimney measured? And Victorian in chimney terms is all the way up to 1965, when they changed the rules. And up to that, the chimneys were just 9 inches by 9 inches square.
Yeah.
And that's what they used to send them up.
Yeah.
How emaciated a child would have to be to get up 9. You draw it sometime on a piece of paper, a 9 inch by 9 inch square.
Yeah.
And it's not very big. I mean, I would say that's 9 inches for me anyway, fingertip to thumb tip. And when you look at that,
yeah.
Yeah.
And of course,
he said about oh, I was round at Granny Smith's the other day, and she was going on about the good old days. He said, so I took away a pension book and shoved her grandson up the chimney.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
I like that.
I'm resisting the temptation to break into Dick Van Dyke.
Oh, please do. Please resist. Yeah.
But I can well imagine that nowadays it's well, I never thought about it because I mean we do have fireplaces in South Africa, but I've never had a chimney cleaned before. I didn't even know there was such an occupation. But thinking about it, it makes a lot of sense because obviously in colder countries where you have probably the chimneys working all the time, they prevent fires from breaking out because a dirty chimney will is it a greater risk of fire? And also there must be very strict rules nowadays on how to keep the the dust, because I mean I can imagine the fine dust particles that come
Oh,
out
yeah.
of a dirty chimney could be really harmful, and the effects of not having a clean chimney must be really profound if one begins to think about it a little bit.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you think about it, your two main risks are fire and fume. If you don't clear the chimney and it gets blocked, you get monoxide in the house, and people treat that with amazing contempt, and it just horrifies me. And the other thing is, if it catches fire, you have to remember that what you've then got is a tube lined with a flammable material.
Yeah.
Lights at the bottom, as they usually do. You've then got this raging fire working its way up the chimney like a rocket engine. It's a tube burning from the bottom and preheating the stuff at the top, and
making its own draft.
Yeah, it can split the whole stack. That's a very expensive repair work needed there. Very expensive.
Yeah, and of course, if that stack falls over, if in many old houses, I can imagine that not all of them are built to well, and there's weathering, and if that stack falls over or the stack cracks or whatever, I can imagine that could have really massive repercussions. So
how's life been treating you now that you've retired, though?
Oh, I love it. I once saw an advert on television, and I'm damned if I can remember now what it was for. But basically, there's a long spit of land going out into the sea, and it's got bushes all over it. So you can't clearly see the person who's running through the bushes towards the sea. And the caption sort of starts at age 20. Your dream is buying a suit. At the age 30, the aim is to buy a handmade suit. And at the age of 40, the dream is burn the suit. And the guy has been ripping off his clothes as he's running through the bushes, and he just reaches the end and dives in the sea. And I was related to that rather a lot.
It's difficult to see what that could. What would that advertise?
I'm damned if I know. I mean, it might be pensions.
It failed anyway, whatever it was, because we don't know what it means.
Yeah, I mean, the other one was I think it was a holiday one. I used to love it. They're in one of these god awful offices, or telephone answering or whatever, and this girl gets to her feet, and she kind of shakes herself like that, and her hair falls down, and she starts walking towards the wall. And as she walks towards the wall, there's sand suddenly under her feet, and the wall dissolves, and there's the sea. And I'm always shouting, "Run! Run! Run!"
So you did that. You've walked through your wall, and there you are, and not in your best life in Spain. Tell us about that.
Definitely, no place is perfect. But this is about as close as it gets. It would be nice if there were trees with money growing on them, but the best we can do is avocados. Yeah, it's nice. The people here are pleasant. I think as with any foreign country, if you are prepared to integrate and learn the language, you'll do a lot better than kind of are distinct. I mean, the people we bought the house from, I don't think spoke more than 2 words of Spanish.
Right.
How they survived here, where very few people speak English,
Yeah.
beats the crap out of me.
So they were expat Brits too.
Yeah. They bought it off the Spanish guy who built it, basically.
So the thing is, I've just been to a meeting in London, as I said, and it was about social cohesion and the problems that we have because we've now got ghettos that are exclusively Muslim, and this is not good because they don't integrate. But you have, and here's me thinking that when we went about the world and invaded places, we didn't integrate either. We made little English ghettos.
Yeah,
but you're not like that.
Well, there are expats here who are very much like that. I mean, I was talking to one guy once, and he was complaining that the Pakistanis, he used what I shall refer to as the P word, if you know what I mean, the shortened version. He was talking about Pakistanis and anybody whose skin wasn't white. And he was complaining bitterly that they wouldn't learn another language and they wouldn't integrate and they wouldn't live together. And you think, well, yeah, when people like you treat them like that, I'm not damn surprised they want to live together.
Yeah.
But it was, this guy lived on a Spanish golf course estate where the only people he sees are English, and he can't speak a damn. And he's going on to me about criticising the sort of side in English, in English, and I'm like, so I don't start laughing from the sheer
hypocrisy of it.
So how long have you been in Spain?
Puzzled and amused me is that, you know, what they shout in abuse towards Pakistanis, right? Well, Pakistan means the clean place. Now, I've never quite understood how you're insulting someone by effectively saying, "Hey, you, Mr. Clean." Hello, clean person. You know, how you insult someone like that.
How long have you been living in Spain now?
Well, we bought the place 20 years ago, and we've been living here for about 15 now.
That's a long time. And why Spain? Was it the weather?
Greece was a close second choice. But the language is a lot harder. You're functionally illiterate for years. And it was that far away.
Even the alphabet is different.
Yeah, well, this is what I mean. It's like if you're in Russia, Japan, Greece, you are instantly a functional illiterate.
It's not that difficult, Bill. I spent a year in Greece as an 18-year-old. I did our pair work in Greece, and I got to learn functional Greek within a month. Yeah,
but when you're young, it's a lot easier to do that. You've got to remember, we retired here. Your brain does tend to fossilize a bit.
We should say here that we're talking to Tercia in her second language. I mean, she's a bit gifted in this respect.
No, not at all. I'm just a South African, and in fact, I'm a very poorly linguisted South African, because many of my compatriots can speak 5 or 6 languages. They speak isiZulu, isiXhosa, Sotho, Afrikaans, and English, and so I'm actually just being able to speak 2 languages in South Africa is not a feat at all. Not at all.
We're impressed. We're impressed anyway.
Well, I always remember seeing an interview with Magnus Magnusson.
Yeah.
Somebody said to him, "It's true, you speak 15 languages." And he said, "Well, only 12 fluently." And I just thought...
Okay, so what do you do to keep yourself out of trouble? Because you can't read science fiction all day long. What are your passions? And do you clean any chimneys?
No, only my own. I just don't know. I'm done with it. I'm absolutely done.
Sorry, before you answer, I just want to... Do you clean the chimneys nowadays with mechanical devices, and do you send up cameras and things like that? How does one clean
it's more and more towards that. I never used to like the powered brushes because you learn to see with your fingers.
Mm.
You feel what the brush is doing, and the vibrations that come down the brush tell you where you are and what you're doing and how's it going. A powered one, I always felt you lost that, and then there was the risk that if there is anything wrong, you're going to do a lot of damage before you.
Yeah. Push it out through the side or something.
Yeah, don't joke. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, so now that I've sorted that, what do you do to keep out of trouble?
Oh, keep out of trouble. I suppose mostly just to garden. We have a couple of friends, and we go around and visit them, and we'll go out and do things. I'm thinking of going to an orchid fair with some of our friends here. That's at the beginning of next month. So that's quite nice. But mostly the garden.
You no longer keep koi as a
it's not really very feasible here unless you've got a lot of surplus income, because the high temperatures also mean that your
evaporation.
If there's a power cut for a day in England, it's not so much a problem because the water's colder and holds more oxygen. But here it's very warm, so you'd worry. And there's no real support network here at all for that sort of thing. So,
but you've got dogs though, haven't you?
Yes, I've got 4 of them. We used to have my daughter's Staffy here, but he sadly died recently. We came down with 2 black Labradors from England when we came.
Ah, labs,
They were old when they came, so they're dead. But we've got a Basset, a Labrador, and a couple of rescue dogs.
I want to ask you. So you're in near Cadiz. How does Cadiz? That's close to the ocean. The ocean is you're on the coast. I know that there's been an increase in high temperatures in Spain, and also in forest or felt fires. I don't know how. If I imagine, I live near Cape Town, and we have a Mediterranean climate, but we're not that close to the ocean. So I imagine that it's mostly shrubland and quite dry.
There's a lot of agricultural land as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Have you the wildflowers are great. I mean, we get an awful lot of wildflowers in the spring, and that's nice. But you mentioned forest fires. Yeah. The big problem there is that sometimes you'll get developers who decide to start them, clear an area through fire, and then, oh dear me, all the pine trees have burnt down. Well, we can sell it now to build on. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Antisocial idiots will throw a cigarette away and things like that. So,
having lived in Spain for 15 years, have you been able to gauge whether there's been a change in the climate in the 15 years that you've been there?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. We are seeing more plant. I mean, when I was in England, we started keeping chickens because we had a very big garden. And when I started chickens, you had to in the winter you had to empty the water pots all at night, and during the daytime, the metal pots you had to prop them up on bricks and put a tea light underneath them so they didn't freeze during the day.
Oh, where was this? What part of England?
Oh, do you know the Duxford Imperial War Museum?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, it's a stone's throw from there.
Right. Yeah.
By the time we stopped keeping chickens, you could leave the water pots open all night, and all you'd have at worst would be a thin skim of ice on the top. And we noticed that plants like loosestrife, when we took that over, loosestrife grew very easily. By the time we left, loosestrife, you couldn't grow it. It was too dry and too hot for it.
Yeah. And orchids. I don't know how you grow orchids in Spain, but in this country there are.
In England, you'd be protecting them from cold, and you'd never really worry about heat. You can buy orchids that tolerate heat, but there's tolerate and there's tolerate. And I've found that over the last few years, I mean, this summer, for instance, we've cut down a couple of persimmon trees because the fruit was just so sunburnt.
Yeah.
It wasn't fit to eat.
Well,
And
in my opinion, persimmons never fit to eat. It's horrible.
Well, yeah, but you know, we're seeing plants like chilies. It used to be you could plant chilies out in the full sun and they'd be okay all year.
Yeah.
Nowadays, what happens this year, the chilies that were shaded in the second half of the summer, they look fine. But the ones that weren't shaded and were in the full sun, they are not happy. And they're really taking a beating.
But orchids is a sort of collector's thing, isn't it? It's not really.
It's an interesting.
Yeah.
It's an interesting plant. Orchids are interesting plants.
Yeah.
And I in the greenhouse I have a network of moss-covered walls, and they're planted in those mostly. There's
yeah.
And I've got some big cymbidium ones which are in the garden.
Yeah.
But I've noticed that several varieties there over the last few years they don't do well and they kind of just go downhill. The same thing with some plants in the garden. We used to have a mulberry tree, gave fruit. Just gone down.
Oh, yeah.
And you can't grow plums here or apricots or apples.
Too dry. Yeah. Too hot.
The bugs kill them. I mean, what we ended up doing was I managed to buy a couple of plum cot trees, and they're a hybrid between plums and apricots.
Oh, right. Okay.
Those is because insects see with their antenna chemically. They'll identify plums as something to lay their eggs in, and they'll identify apricots. But when they get the chemicals from off a plum cot tree, they don't see it as food.
Oh, great.
I have to worry about is the sparrows eating it because all the bugs leave them straight home.
Yeah. So mulberry trees, you don't see them very commonly. I've only ever seen one, and that's in Kew Gardens.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was sweeping chimneys, I'd often, in the older houses, there'd often be a mulberry tree in the garden. I mean, they're disgusting fruit to pick. You pick them, and your hands are so stained with red juice that you look like somebody from an overacted slasher.
You've got a very short window of opportunity when they are just right and not beyond. Yeah.
They're not a plant. You making jam out of them is really not practical. We have Nispro here. I mean, they're a loquat. Have you ever heard of? Oh God, name's going on. Probably going senile. It's a plant that they grow in Britain. It's a loquat, but it's even worse than Nispro doing. And Prince Charles used to like the jam they make from it. Charles II. And so all the aristos would plant little groves of these trees, you see. Oh, we planted this in case His Majesty comes by. He's frankly that's medlar jam. Frankly,
medlar, yeah. It's a sort of wizened apple.
Yeah, disgusting. And the only way you can eat them is you pick the fruit and you get like a cake stand and you cover it with sawdust. And you arrange the fruit so none of them are really touching, but only just not touching. And then you cover them with sawdust and you put another layer on. So you've got these tower of fruit and you leave them to rot. And then you eat them when they're rotting. And it's an actual English verb. It's called letting, which is a word you don't hear very often.
You haven't sold me, I'm afraid.
No, nobody sold me on the idea of eating medlars. No, pass.
Anyway, we actually met on we were obviously talking to some theist or somebody in some chat room about matters of a religious nature.
Oh, yes.
So this is something you do as a hobby?
Yeah, I quite enjoy being on Facebook, and those boards are very interesting. Most of the debate you get with the religious people isn't very uplifting. There's a lot of dishonesty in it, and it can be rather interesting. But the upside is that every now and then, in an answer to some ridiculous claim, someone will post some really good scientific articles, and those are worth reading every time.
Yeah. I remember you said that you were interested in the Royal Institution Christmas lectures.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I love those. They're brilliant.
They're not quite so engaging, but when they used to start off, and you had things like Dawkins talking about zoology, or some of the plate tectonics and things like that, they were programs that absolutely gripped you.
Yeah.
And they were so informative, and it was such basic science. I always used to say that watching the program on tectonics, I learned more in 1 hour watching those programs than I had in my entire life before.
Do you want to see a clip? I can show one. Here we go.
This is a model to show what happens in a trench, where, in this case, the seafloor is going to be sliding underneath the land. And this could be India as a passenger or an island in the Indian Ocean, with the Indian Ocean seafloor here sliding down underneath Asia. This would be Asia, southern Tibet. Let's remind ourselves what actually happens. As we move this, let's move it, we get shallow earthquakes here on the interface between those two plates as they go down. As this plate is being pushed down into the mantle, we get deep earthquakes within this plate here. These red lights are showing deep earthquakes in the plate going down as it breaks up. Now remember that these rocks which are entering the trench on the seafloor are wet rocks. They have water in them, and that water is what triggers melting down here. So somewhere down here we have melting, and that magma rises to the surface. A lot of it will freeze here to make granite, but some will come to the surface as volcanoes along the top here, along the southern edge of Asia. And all this is fine. We actually do see in southern Tibet big areas of granite that would have been formed as the Indian Ocean was sliding underneath Asia. All that is fine. We see that, and on top of that granite will have been volcanoes of this sort. Okay. But now let's see what happens when India actually gets closer to the trench. So let's just move India right up into the trench then, Bipin, please. Right there. And now what's going to happen now? What we see today is no volcanoes at all in southern Tibet. There are no active volcanoes, nor are there any deep earthquakes anymore. They've all switched off. India is not going down the hatch. It's not being pushed back into the earth anymore. Something else is happening instead. One thing we know is going on is that India is still moving. This is not like a car crash where everything just stops. We know from the spreading in the Indian Ocean ridge that India is still moving north towards Asia at about 50 millimeters per year. Now, it was moving much faster. It was moving at about 150 millimeters per year before the collision, and it slowed down to 50 millimeters per year now. But since the collision, about 40 or 50 million years ago, India has shoved about 2,000 kilometers into Asia. That's a huge distance. That's from here to Rome. India has ploughed into Asia. And obviously that is something to do with why the Himalayas and Tibet are there.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff, isn't it, eh? Yeah.
It was as a lovely illustration. I don't think, I mean, I know, but I never grasped it all. But there's a wonderful illustration of how much things erode. Do you know what a pluton is?
No.
No idea.
Okay, a pluton is a bubble of granite.
Okay.
And what happens is, if you can imagine, there's the line between the crust and the molten magma. What happens is you get a hot spot, a really hot spot, and a bubble of molten granite forms. This bubble rises up through the crust, and it melts the rock above it, and the rock kind of goes around and passes. And this bubble keeps going upwards until it's lost enough energy so that it can't melt the crust anymore, and it stops. It's like a hot air balloon.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
fact, it's identical to a hot air balloon. If you can
but
imagine a hot air balloon rise to so
but
much, it stops.
it's a hot air balloon, but it's in solid.
Have you ever seen an image of Yosemite, the huge, the El Capitan? I've seen somebody climbing El Capitan up the sheer rock face without ropes, without anything. It makes me feel physically ill. I'm not good at this. But if you look at it, that flat surface is half a Pluton.
Oh, right.
Fell off.
Uh-huh.
Now, I don't know, it's something like 3,000 feet. Once upon a time, the top of that Pluton was thousands of feet below the surface.
Yeah, yeah.
With geological uplift and erosion, all that's worn away, and the Pluton has been exposed. And you think how long that takes.
Does this mean the world isn't 6,500 years old?
No, sorry. Spoiler alert, it's a lot older. I once had, if I ever win the lottery, on the wall there, you'll see, there will be a section of rock.
Mm.
So I once saw this and I thought if I had money to burn, I would buy a slice of that rock.
Yeah.
It's called a conglomerate. All right. Now, what happens with a conglomerate is a mountain gets eroded down, the bits end up in the river, they're rolled into pebbles, the pebbles roll down the river, they get covered in sand, they're covered, they're all covered up, so it goes down and down and down. And it goes so far down that it starts to get into that hot melted layer.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it fuses into rock. It doesn't fuse so much that it kind of like goes into a mush, but it turns to rock.
Yeah, yeah. So it keeps like
it begins the journey all the way back up.
Yeah, yeah.
Exposed again, and then somebody can take a section. And on this particular one, it's cut through half a dozen of the pebbles.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
If you look at one of the pebbles has inclusions, just like these are inclusions. So that means
it's done it twice.
Has been through the whole process twice.
Yes.
You don't get that except in deep time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it's like a sort of natural concretey sort of stuff, really, isn't it? In a way. Yeah, yeah.
Well, you've made me think now about a series I'm watching on Netflix at the moment. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist by no means. Well, I hope I'm not. I don't think I am. And I know that the Graham Hancock is a little bit of a I mean, he's had some weird ideas in the past, and I don't really follow him, but I do know his theories about, or his hypotheses about the pyramids, and so they're frowned upon and not really accepted, or haven't in the past. But now I came across this series on Netflix called Ancient Apocalypse, and your talk of rocks and stones and subduction zones and things like that has reminded me. Maybe I'd love to hear your opinion about this, Bll. So his hypothesis, nothing extraordinary about it in the sense that there's no claims of aliens or nothing supernatural, but where he does diverge from the accepted archaeological wisdom is that he hypothesizes that there was an advanced human civilization before and during the last ice age, which is about 12,000 years ago. And what's remarkable to me, and I'll have to do some more research and look up many of the things for myself, because you can't believe what you see on the screen, is that there seems to have been emerging archaeological and scientific research that indicates that maybe we do have some gaps in our knowledge of the deep past of human civilization. And one of the places he visits is it's near Cusco in Peru. And I mean, there are these huge basalt rock walls, but the rocks are these huge stones. I mean, one of them can weigh up to 1,000 tons, and they are very neatly stacked on top of each other, but they're not. The shapes are odd. It's polygons, but they match exactly. And the only other place.
How they did that.
Sorry.
I can tell you how they did that, and it's very easy.
How did they do that? Tell
you
me.
are making an assumption.
Sorry.
If you can imagine that those rocks were perfect cubes, right?
Yeah.
If you were building a wall out of cubes, they are not perfect cubes. The face is a perfect square, or whatever shape it is, but they aren't parallel-sided. What happens is, as they go into the wall, they taper. So the only point that they touch is just on the edge. It's difficult to think how to really illustrate that. But if you can imagine, I'm just going to give you something. If I got a piece, you'll do. Where two rocks are touching each other, they aren't touching each other like that. They're tapered, so they only touch each other like that.
Okay.
Looking from above, looking down on them
from above. Now, if you climb up one of those walls and look down, you can see there's like a V-shaped gap filled with dirt in between each two pair of rocks. And if you look at the rock wall, how they're made, you'll see over on the one side, there's a huge rock. Then there's a rock that's a little bit smaller, then a rock that's a bit smaller and smaller. So it's like a staircase. And then you can then work up the staircase with the next layer. It's a very, very simple and elegant construction, but there's really nothing particularly skilled. Now, when it comes to these things, if I were a stick of rock and you cut me in half, the word cynic would be printed across the middle. I don't like the ancient aliens and the ancient civilizations and all the rest. You see, the question is immediately, where have all they all gone to?
Yes, yes.
I don't have any real records. And most of when they show you statues or weird drawings, like there's a famous one in Cambodia where, ooh, look, it's a stegosaurus. No, it isn't. It's a tapir with a leaf motif around it. It's not
right.
The head's wrong for a stegosaurus, the tail's wrong for a stegosaurus. It's tapir.
Yes, yes.
These things just don't work out. If there had been ancient civilizations around, there would have been traces. Now, there are, I think, enough evidence to say that there's some interesting buildings, possibly under the sea, more on the continental shelf type, around there. And the logic behind that is when the Ice Age was there, that's where it was nearest to the sea, so it's where people built. As the sea rose, so they were inundated. I have no problem with that, but you don't need any super science or anything to explain these things. I've watched a video of a guy moving a 20-ton concrete block and setting it up vertically upright in a hole, all by himself. Yeah. Now, when you look at these people and what they did and what they achieved, if you've got an almost limitless number of people and your country is so rich that you've got food everywhere, you can afford to have an army of craftsmen. It's like, you know, the Cleopatra's Needle, Steely, I think they call them, yeah? And everybody goes, oh, you couldn't do that with their technology. I can assure you they were made with Stone Age technology, because they've got one in a quarry that cracked when they were halfway through making it. You can see that around this stele is a trench. And in the middle of the trench are hammerstone marks. They've got really hard rock hammerstones, and they would just hit the sandstone or whatever with it, and it would break, and then you brush it away, and then hit it some more, and another bit breaks, and so it goes. You turn the rock that you don't want into powder and just sweep it away. Skilled, and it takes a lot of work and time and energy. But
time wasn't so expensive in those days.
Well, labour was dirt cheap back then. Absolutely dirt cheap.
So what do you think about blasphemy, Bill?
Oh, blasphemy is a little law that's been made up so poor little God can't get his precious feelings hurt. Basically,
Well, I can show you an example of it. Would you like? Because I did some blasphemy and I got done by God. Take a look at this. Take a look at this.
We could actually get a test group together, right?
Yeah.
And under controlled conditions, have them blaspheme.
Yes.
And after, see if there's a direct, a direct punishment exacted from on high. And if nothing happens, then that is further proof that, it's not a blasphemy at all.
Yeah. And how telling is it? Lies hate to be tested. Lies will tell you, don't look under the covers. Don't ask how this trick was done. Don't try to spoil the illusion. Whereas
don't look behind the curtain.
Exactly. Whereas the truth is always asking you to verify it, and always asking you to provide proofs for it, and always asking you to look at it critically and try to get closer and closer to the truth with each attempt. Any being that says don't test me is a being that's hiding something. And if we live in a world where a devil exists that is all about tricking and tempting people, you have to consider that a God that says don't test me may not necessarily be in your interest.
Right. The truth has nothing to hide from investigation.
Absolutely. Like, what's the point of lawsuits? Like, what? Don't test me. What other standard of evidence do we apply that to? Oh, there was a murder, but don't test it. Just punish this guy. Don't test it. Take
I love
this pill
that.
if you're sick, but don't test
I love
it.
the quote from H.P. Lovecraft says, instead of trying to browbeat the gospels into your children, why not, if gospels are true, just tell them to have an unswerving devotion to looking into the truth and trying to find truth. Then they will discover it if it's true.
Watch this, guys. Look, God, you're evil, and if you exist, destroy me now.
There he goes.
He turned into a green screen.
That was good.
Watching.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that. Why doesn't God kill Satan? Well, it's called the Tom and Jerry paradox.
Yes.
Over, isn't it?
How religious is the region that you live in, as in terms of most people? Do most people, I mean, it's Catholic, I presume, and do they?
That's quite weird. That's quite weird. They're very religious, but they just don't believe it. Seriously, they pay lip service to religion very much, and a lot of them believe it very profoundly, but an awful lot of the people here just not religious at all, but I love that about questioning things. I think that's very important. We always raised our children to question everything, and that made for interesting parenting. But for some strange reason, they all turned up atheists. I can't imagine why.
So you didn't have a religion. You're like me. You're raised in.
I was very lucky. Both my parents were not religious. I was not required to attend these things.
Well, that's right.
So you assume that this sort of stuff is true when you're young, because that's why they pump it into you.
Yeah.
And then the internet comes along and you go, oh, look, if I press this key, it takes me to a magical kingdom where all my questions are answered.
Yes.
And you suddenly realize that there is, for instance, no evidence anywhere that Jesus ever existed. Valid evidence.
Yeah.
Right? He's saying, oh, I feel him in my heart.
Yes.
No, it's not evidence.
Probably gastric flu.
One person alive at that time wrote a single word about him anywhere.
No.
You look at Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, and the Paul of the Bible never existed. He's a composite character. All these works are written by about 4 different people, and his storyline for how he became religious. Oh yeah, that's the kind of story I'd tell if I wanted to con gullible people out of their money. Oh, I was so bad. I was an evil person. Please. And it's like you look in the Old Testament, and that's a festival of fun. A guy Finkelstein wrote a book called Unearthing the Old Testament. And he does to the Old Testament what Carrier does to the New. He rips it. And if you actually look at the real archaeological evidence, Solomon never existed, and everything before him in the Bible, fairy tales. The Exodus never happened, invasion of Judea. Oh, please. 2 million Jews walk into a country that...
You mean Moses
Moses
didn't cleave the Red Sea?
What with? It's all, you know, it's all fairy tales. So
would you describe yourself as a mythicist, Bill?
A mythicist? Yes, I suppose I am, really. But, you know, I always get, mythicism, mythicist, you're all stupid. And I say, okay, fair enough. Just post a single piece of valid evidence for creation, Jesus, or your magic sky daddy.
Or resurrection.
And they run away crying, or they block me, or they lose their temper. It's all the same, really. You know, somebody says to me, provide evidence for evolution. I'll go, yeah. Endogenous retroviruses, DNA, genetic scarring. Never mind the fossils, we'll leave them. But those three, you just can't. You know, DNA works. And DNA says we're related to everything in exactly the way the theory of evolution predicts. So it's kind of hard to knock that one aside.
Certainly is. Yeah.
Shall I ask Bill his opinion about free will, John? We have 10 minutes left.
We do. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
It's my thing, Bill. Are you a determinist or a compatibilist?
I have no idea what you mean by those words.
So John and I have one key difference. Well, we have more than one, but one of the things we disagree about is that I'm convinced that we have no free will. I'm a determinist in the sense that Robert Sapolsky is, and I think Sam Harris would also be classified more as a determinist. I lean strongly towards hard determinism, and the reason I do is because I think it's the implications for how we live our lives and how we live together is really profound if we can accept that we don't have free will. So what's your opinion?
I'm very much a free will, because if you don't believe in religion, how can you believe in anything other than free will? And I mean, here's the question. Here's a question to ask. Let's say you have cornflakes for breakfast every morning. Can you surprise God by having porridge tomorrow? And the answer is no, of course you can't, because he knows everything. But if he knows everything, then he hasn't got free will, has he? If you know everything that's going to happen, you can't have free will.
Absolutely.
Because you're rolling down a predetermined track.
Yes.
Okay,
So,
hang on. Take God out of this. God is not relevant to the discussion on whether we have free will or not. So it's purely a question of, do we do what we do because we choose it, or is it determined, not predetermined? Not predetermined. There's a big difference. Determined by a myriad of factors that we have no control over.
I would say, if you want to be very sort of strict in that interpretation, you have free will within a limited span. So I can't go and fly to India because I don't have the money.
No, you can't choose to do something which is not one of the options on the table. Of course you can't. No,
yeah, but I'm just saying, within the options that are there for you, you have free will. But some of those options, the scales may be tilted towards them because of your problems, or what you have or what you don't have.
Yeah. So at the meeting,
you're obviously a compatibilist. You say we have some free will, but it's limited by circumstances, DNA, where you grew up, what your mom did. Okay,
like
so I just
talk about random. People have huge problems with random. Human brains just can't deal with it. But what I always say is that when you're looking at things like evolution or anything else, it isn't pure random.
No, it isn't. No.
Random within the parameters.
Yeah, yeah.
Like if you roll a ball down a hillside, then it can only go within a certain amount. Do you know what I mean? It can't go more than about 45 degrees, even if it hits.
But does that not imply that we are like the ball? We can't choose where we roll. What we do and when we do it and how we do it is determined by the slope, the angle of the slope, our mass, and all the other factors.
That's just the same thing again. You're controlled by the slope. I can't do what I can't afford to do. I can't do what would, kill me, or I can't go beyond that. But I can choose within that. I'm not bound. The ball is totally determined where it's going by everything that happens to it, and it has no say in the matter. We're like the ball, but we have a say in the matter. We can say, no, I'm going over to the left side, I'm going over to the right, or vice versa.
So at the meeting I attended today, one of the speakers was Emma she was formerly the editor of the Free Thinker, which is a magazine that's been going since I don't know when. And she's now a freelance journalist, but she was in the panel of people on the stage at the meeting today. And here, I'm about to show you, is a clip from a little interview that I did with her. Take a look at this, because it's relevant to free will. The other question I wanted to throw at you, Emma, is, does free thought presuppose free will?
Oh gosh, that's a tricky question. Thank you, John. Gosh, that's going to keep me going. I suppose it must do, isn't it? I mean, it's impossible to think of the idea of thought being free, in a way that, because I suppose you could think freely without being able to act freely. And we've got Jason Hoblin there saying, in Sam Harris territory, greatest amount of happiness for most amount of people. Well, yeah, because that's the utilitarian approach, which would then, it has its own problems. But when we do that, how are you going to measure happiness and all that sort of thing? But I mean, it's sort of, I don't know. I would have to go back and think about that. It's a really deep question this time in the evening. But I mean, I think my gut reaction would be to say it doesn't make sense to talk about free thought without free will, because how can you decide what you even want to think about unless you have free will in the first place?
I'd agree with that, I think.
Yeah, there you go. So we're coming up to the end of our time. And I don't know who we've got next week as our guest, but you may know, Tercia.
Well, it depends on what we get arranged, what I get arranged tomorrow with somebody in your neck of the woods, John, in Liverpool, I think, who I know via Recovering from Religion. We will confirm tomorrow. But then, if you are willing, we might have a pre-recorded show with the South African podcaster, Des Latham. So I've been in contact with him. So we might have a pre-recorded one that we broadcast because Des can't make our live sessions. They're a bit late for him.
Yeah, sure.
So it's one of those. It's one of those two, and that's the best I've been able to come up with so far. So
I like it.
Yeah. I've sent email messages to a few people, but I haven't had any responses.
No.
But just in closing, Bill, if you're keen, I can suggest that you watch Robert Sapolsky's lectures on free will, and then somebody that I would love to get on our show as a guest, Brian Klaas. He's a historian and political scientist, quite a young fellow. He's written his second book, which is called Fluke. So if you into interesting reading, and I've just listened to Fluke as an audiobook, brilliant. And he looks at history and how history is a lot more random than we think. And maybe in closing, the one thing that the one quote that I've taken away from Brian Klaas's book Fluke is he says, we control nothing, but we influence everything. And that, to me, so he basically proposes also that we don't have free will, but he does it within the context of politics and history. But what's so nice about he explains very clearly that while we don't control things, we influence things, because we are one of those factors in a basically almost completely random universe. And because there's so many variables, what we do, whether we do it out of free will or not, will have an influence and effect somewhere.
Yeah.
Even though we might never know it. And we so there's just something interesting.
Yeah.
And if anybody knows how to get hold of Brian Klaas, I think he'd be a brilliant
He would. Yes, he would. You're right. His book is called Fluke, Chance, Chaos, and Why Everything We Do Matters. There you go.
I like the theory that history has inertia. If you'd killed Hitler, there would have been somebody pretty much like him would have taken over. Except the danger would be that he might be more intelligent and less likely to do crazy things, which was the subject of Stephen Fry's book. Can't remember what it was called now.
Well, Stephen Fry is one of the celebs who's going to appear on stage at our next event, which is on the 14th of December. And after the stage part of the evening, he will be signing his latest book, which is one of his mythological books. It's on Odysseus, one of the Greek gods. Yeah. So that's it for tonight. Thank you very much. You've been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tercia. Thank you, audience, future audience, because they'll be watching it when it's a podcast. Say bye-bye.
Goodbye.